Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I think I know just about everybody here, but for the one or two of you that may not know who I am, I'm Melissa Roberts. I'm the director of the Transplant and BAD programs here. And the kidney transplant allocation system is about to change coming up next month. So I've got some slides, and I thought I would just talk about the ins and outs of the system so that everyone is kind of aware of how it works. I will start this off by saying I'm on the Transplant Administrators Committee for UNOS, but even we are feel a little unprepared for the big change that's going in December, because there has not been a whole lot of technical information given on the system yet. But this will at least be what we do know so far. All right, this is what we're going to kind of run through. There is just some beginning kind of foundational information that most of you are very, very well aware of already. Here are objectives that nobody ever reads all the way through. And so transplant by the numbers. So I think most of you know, I think we've now hit 100,000. The numbers are a few months old here. I think we've hit 100,000 for the number of patients that are waiting for kidney on the national list. And I just checked today, and we're just shy of 124,000 people waiting for transplants in the U.S. So 80% of the list, roughly, is that right? Yeah, about 80% of the list is solely people waiting for kidney transplant. We add about 35,000 new listings a year. Here, how many do we add for kidney? We add about 350, I think, somewhere around 350 a year to that list. And then about 28,000 people are removed from the list every year, either for transplant, they die on the list, they become too ill, there are a number of reasons that people can be removed. So of the 28,000 that are removed, only 11,000 of those are deceased donor transplants. For the first time in 2012, the number of living and deceased donors decreased. So there have been, many of you might be aware of the collaborative and some of the initiatives across the U.S. back in 2002, 2003 to really increase the number of donors, both living and deceased donors. And that was pretty effective. And we saw the number of deceased donors kind of slowly climb. And so then it kind of started to plateau a little bit, and now it's actually decreased. So some of that may be in part to better trauma services, better stroke services, that sort of thing. And some of that may also be due to public opinion. I think there are some studies, but I don't have the research on me right now. So making use of every kidney has never been more important as it is now. We've got, only about 11,000 kidneys a year, so we have to make the best use of them. So I think that informs our selection for recipients and who we allow on that list to receive a kidney, and certainly what kind of kidneys we accept. The median time to transplant for kidney transplant in the U.S. is about 53 months. We are about half of that at 24 months is our average on our last SRTR. We have one of the shortest waiting times in the country. So living donation, this is my shameless plug for living kidney donors. It's always going to be the best option for patients, even if they've been on the list for 5 years and are coming up to the top. If they all of a sudden have a potential living donor, we really should be working them up. I think everyone knows what all the benefits of having a living donor are. They consistently have better function. They generally last longer. You can schedule the surgery. All of those things just make it a win-win situation. Then they don't take a deceased donor for someone that doesn't, a deceased donor organ for someone that may not have a living donor. And as you'll see as we go through, keep this in mind, as we go through, you'll see that there may be certain types of patients that we, going forward, think only about living donation for because of the change in the system. They may be very unlikely to get a deceased donor transplant. All right. So the current system, it's kind of I see it as kind of an a la carte. Patients have a lot of options. They can decide how much risk they want to take with their organ. They can say, I'll take a less than perfect organ if I don't have to wait quite as long, and then I'll take that risk. And if the kidney doesn't work so well, after I write a letter and say that I want a new kidney, I'll have to deal with it. These are the kind of common decisions that we've got: brain death versus donation after cardiac death. We know that brain death is obviously has a less physical toll on the kidney than DCD does. They have a slightly higher rate of ATN, of the kidney not working, but typically they have a pretty good success rate. And then standard criteria donor versus ECD. The expanded criteria kidneys are from older donors with hypertension, died of a stroke. And so these are the criteria that were previously used. Standard criteria is on the left, and then the expanded on the right. I think most of us are pretty aware of these criteria right now. We use a fair number of ECD kidneys here, but it is really targeted towards the patients that's really right for. We're not going to put an expanded criteria donor into a patient that's 20 years old. So this is going away. We're going to be getting rid of the ECD designation, and it's going to be assigned a number going forward. So the current system also, you pretty much get added to the bottom of the list, and you work your way up. There are a few exceptions for that. You can get extra points if you're sensitized, if you're difficult to match, or if you have previously been a living donor. The limitations of the current system, with the data that they've really modeled, they've seen that it's really underserving the minorities across the country. It doesn't give you any relative risk of the grafts. So a DCD donor and ECD, they kind of all fall into the same. There's really no way to categorize. One is more risky of an ECD than another. And then the donor organs, it works both ways. Some of we may have a 65-year-old kidney that gets transplanted into a 23-year-old, or a 23-year-old kidney that goes into a 75-year-old, and that's something that we want to avoid. We want the right organ to go into the right recipient. So currently, the way that the point system works, roughly a point equals a year on the list for when their GFR gets below 21. So is everyone aware that if you're a previous living donor, you get 4 extra points on the list? I think it's a really important thing that we inform our living donors of that, because that's one of the common concerns, is that, what's going to happen to me if my kidneys fail, knowing that they get such preference on the list, and that's not going away. Living donors will continue to have that benefit of priority on the list after the new allocation system goes in. And right now, if you see the PRA of greater than 80% currently gets 4 points. That is changing in a big way with the new system as well. There are 2 extra points for mismatches, 0 DR mismatch, and then the one point for every year roughly on the list. And we have about 730 patients on our list right now. There are centers such as San Francisco has, I believe, 5,000 patients on their list. So all of the preparation that we have done for the new system, and the data team certainly has done, the donor center has done, for getting all of our patients ready for the switch onto the new system. Imagine having to do that with 5,000 patients and tracking down exact dialysis start dates. Those centers are not done yet. Only 80% of the patients across the country have had all of their information validated. We just heard that statistic yesterday on our UNOS call. So the objectives for changing the system, does anybody know how long they've been trying to change the kidney allocation system? Yeah. 10 or 12 years. I mean, it's been taking a very long time. So those of us really worried about liver allocation changes, it may be a few years yet. It's been a very long time. Previous systems that they've come up with were found to disadvantage the elderly, and the current system may do that a little bit too. They've been working on it for quite a while. So what they really want to do is improve the efficiency, the utilization, to make sure that the right kidney goes to the right patient. Make sure that the graft longevity and the recipient longevity are a good match. Again, that's that 23-year-old kidney going into a 75-year-old. So the new system will allocate the highest quality of kidneys, KDPI of less than 20%, to candidates with the longest estimated life after their transplant. So, Candy is familiar with the analogy that I use. So, as we get into the system a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit more about it. But those good kidneys, those 0 to 20 or those 1 to 20 KDPIs, I see those as kind of like the Lamborghinis of cars. So thinking if you've got to get a new car, those Lamborghinis are really hard to come by. Not everybody has access to those 0 to 20% kidneys. But those are definitely the best that will be transplantable under the new system. And right now, there's really no way. If you have a standard criteria donor, you may know that that's a 30-year-old, but you don't know if that's a KDPI of 15 or if that's a KDPI of 35 based on their characterizations in the system. So the other goal is to really reduce the differences. NOTA, who can tell me what NOTA stands for? National Organ Transplant Act. It was back in the 70s, and really they haven't opened that back up since the 70s, and it really requires that we as organizations, member organizations for UNOS, make sure that that we reduce the differences across populations, geographic disparities, and that sort of thing. So now the good stuff. So a lot of new acronyms in the new system. If there's one thing, there's a lot more four-letter words in the new system. KDRI, KDPI, roughly the same thing. I'll go into what those are. The way that the points are accrued, the time is accrued in the system is going to change. The allocation and who gets those best 20%, those Lamborghinis, it's going to change. For the first time, they're actually kind of grading the recipients with the EPTS, their estimated post-transplant survival. So that's why we had to do all this data validation and really put in if patients have diabetes, if they've previously been transplanted, some of the things that go into the EPTS. And then the national access to very high PRA candidates. This is going to be huge for our patients that wait a long time because they're sensitized, meaning they're more likely to not have a good match because of their exposure to blood products, pregnancies, and that sort of thing. We don't have, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, Trish may know, about how many really highly sensitized patients we have on our list right now. We don't have too many.
We don't, I was going to say there's probably about out of the 750.
Not a huge number, but those patients can wait 10, 15, 20 years for a kidney just because they're so unlikely to match anyone that comes through. December 4th is the date that we have now for when they're going to flip the switch. And again, I think we're all just a little bit nervous about that date. So KDRI and KDPI, I've heard those acronyms used kind of interchangeably, but they do have two slightly different meanings. So those are calculations that they do on the donor. So this is a way that they kind of grade, for lack of a better term, the donor. So the kidney donor risk index is the risk of that kidney failing. So one is kind of baseline. One is your average. Anything higher than one indicates that is a riskier kidney. And that value is translated to the KDPI, which is the 0 to 100 scale. And you don't want higher numbers. The higher the number, the less likely that kidney is to work. And it's a very complex system. I think it's a little difficult for professionals to wrap their mind around. So think about how we are educating our patients and how they are going to have to really kind of understand, to some degree, the ins and outs of the system. That's why I like to go to the car analogy, because most of us in our lives have had to get a car at some point. So the KDRI, that risk index, is then mapped to the profile index, so a KDPI. So a KDPI of 80% has a higher risk of failure than 80% of the kidneys that were recovered in the previous calendar year. So this will change over time as the years go on. So if you look at this example, there's a calculator online. This is just a fictitious donor that I put in. So 25-year-old donor, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, African American, has no history of hypertension, no history of diabetes that we know of, died of head trauma, had a serum creatinine of 1.0. That and also does not have hepatitis C and is not a donor after cardiac death. If you can see at the bottom, the KDPI, so the risk index of that donor on the right, is 0.76, so it's less than 1. So that's a lower risk kidney. So that maps to a KDPI of 23%. So it's overall it's not in that Lamborghini range, but it's a very, very good kidney. Then if you look at the second example, we've got a 66-year-old, 5'9", 225 pounds, multiracial, has had hypertension for more than 10 years, has a history of diabetes, died of a stroke, and has a serum creatinine of 1.8. Also does not have hep C and is a regular brain dead donor. If you can see that donor would have a KDRI of 2.09, so roughly twice the average risk of failure, and then a KDPI of 99%. So has a fairly high chance of failing. And then if we look at the survival rates, I want to draw some attention to this because I think the higher KDPI kidneys people are going to be very hesitant to accept them, but I think they are good kidneys for the right recipient. So if you look, that 99%, the one we just talked about, at 3 years still has almost a 60% chance of working. So that kidney will probably work, but it's probably not the type of kidney you're going to want to put in a 30-year-old. It may be good for someone that has some advanced age or has limited life expectancy to start with, some of those higher EPTS scores. So if you look at the KDPI of 1, that kind of 1%, which would be one of the best kidneys that you can get, has a KDRI, that risk index is 0.55, so well below 1.0. At 1 year has about the national average of a 94% chance of working. And then this is just graft survival, of course, not patient survival. So as you go down, you guys know what the cutoff is going to be, the kind of the big number for what is going to equal an expanded criteria donor in the new system? 85. So if you look at between 80 and 90, so that kidney has about an 84, if you had an 85% or a KDPI of 85, still has about an 84% chance of working at the first anniversary. So it's still not a bad kidney for the right patients. And as this changes, remember it's all going to be dependent on the previous year's kidney recovery. We'll see this change, and we'll probably see the rates get a little bit better. So this is just another way to look at the graft survival by just for 1 and 2 years with the KDPI going across the bottom. So even those 60, 65%, 70% have a fairly decent chance. There's not that much difference if you really look at the 1 and 2 year for those that are down in kind of the 80% range. So they've done a lot of modeling, and people much smarter than me have put the system together. So I'm going to trust that it will work. KDPI, the whole system is really going to be for use in adults. Deceased kidney donors, we're not going to characterize living donors using KDPI. Considers 10 factors, the way that it kind of assesses the donor. It doesn't account for things such as kind of acute kidney injury, but mind you, the current system doesn't account for these either. Past medical history outside of diabetes and hypertension, and of course for deceased organ donors, we only know the risks of what we know of at the time of transplant. We depend on those people that are there with the donor at the time. That's where we get the information on their history. And then any increased risk of infections or cancers are, as they're not now, are not really included. All right, so these are the things that that takes into account for the KDPI. If you're curious, there is an online calculator if you want to see what your KDPI would be, how you would be rated as a donor. We'll all do it. It's but it's just kind of put in recent donors. And KDPI, for those of you that have access to UNET and look at organ donors, that they've been using KDPI for a couple of years now, so we can actually go back and see what kind of organs we've been accepting. So the benefits, so why even go through the trouble of this? They are expecting to get more than 8,000 additional life years gained. So matching those better, having a better matching system for the kidneys and putting in will hopefully give us these life years, will decrease those need for retransplants, and then, as the modeling has shown, should make more kidneys available. Getting those highly sensitized candidates, many times those are our retransplants, transplanted should be improved in the new system. I don't have the slide in here, but the minorities will definitely benefit in the new system with the allocation, especially African Americans. And it also allows for more accurate forecasting of graft survival, at least to the best of our ability. So the changes in the new system, and Natalie actually asked me if the 202 was an error. So these are the points that you get. So that prior, you'll see at the top, prior living donor is still 4 additional points. Medical urgency, I don't know if are there local variances down here for medical urgency? So if someone has exhausted all of their dialysis access, you can usually, call your local centers and say, hey, we've got somebody that really, really needs to be transplanted. Other than that, being a prior living donor is the only way to get those 4 additional points. You can get up to 202 points, which would be equal to 202 years on the kidney list for having a PRA over 80%. So those patients that are really sensitized from blood transfusions, previous transplant, will definitely benefit. And then the allocation is a little different for that as well. 0 DR mismatch now gets 2, and then if you're less than 35 years old, for those pediatric and young adult candidates, they automatically get an extra point. And then their waiting list time, again, is 1 point per year, but this is when their GFR goes down. So this is a big difference for patients, and something that may impact how we list patients, or UNOS is worried it may impact how we list patients. So it's no longer from the time they get on the list and their GFR is below 20. It's when it's really from their dialysis start date or when their GFR gets. So if somebody has been floating along with a GFR of 20, 21 for years, we have some evidence of that. They can actually get all of those years on the list. So it's a good thing to know, especially those patients that may come late to transplant, either because they don't have access, they're not aware of their options, or they've been told by their physician for many years that they're not a candidate. So this will have a big impact, and what it's going to do to our list. So for those of you that don't work with us on a daily basis, we have our 4 blood groups. What this is essentially going to do on December 4th is hit shuffle on our list. Right now, we know who's kind of up towards the top and who's coming close to transplant. That's it, based on their dialysis start date and some of the other factors, that the list is just going to get shuffled when they turn the system on. UNOS had promised us that they were going to give us some modeling so we could see what it's going to do to our list, but we haven't seen that yet. So I'm hoping it's going to come. For a couple little caveats to this, so dialysis time, when someone has a previous transplant, they don't go back to their initial dialysis prior to their first transplant. They go to when they went back on dialysis, because they don't get to use all those years that they had a functioning transplant. So EPTS, so this is the grading of the recipients, or the scoring of the recipients. And it only takes in 4 different things. So time on dialysis, and these are all negative. So these are all things that lower their estimated post-transplant survival. Their time on dialysis, their age, if they've had a prior transplant, and if they have diabetes. And as I have noted there, the only thing that really can improve someone's EPTS is if their diabetes resolves. That doesn't happen very often. All right, so the kidneys from donors with a KDPI less than 20 will be allocated to the top 20% of those patients with good EPTS scores, with longer life expectancy after transplant. So most adults younger adults between 18 and 25 will fall in that 20%. About 80% of patients that are under 35, 26 to 35, and then only 10% of our candidates 46 to 55 will be in that kind of top 20% that may have access to those Lamborghinis. So if you look at this, so what we have, so if you look at the bars all the way on the left, the orange, that's the age breakdown for what's on the national list right now. And then you can see the bar next to that is those that received transplants in 2010. The red bar is projected transplants, sorry. The red is the current wait list. No, that's the orange. It's been a while since I explained this slide. The important bar is the blue one on the right. Sorry. The blue shows really what the projected kind of allocation will be by age. So you can see that where the blue bar is the highest in the 18 to 34 category and that 35 to 49 category, and where the blue bar decreases, so the percentage of transplants that will decrease in the age groups of 50 and over, more or less. Sorry, it's been a while since I saw this one. All right. This is, I'm not even going to try to explain this. These are the details of how the sequencing goes. But if you'll see, so the sequence is kind of when the kidney comes up on our list. So most of you know, we get the list from UNOS. They tell us, who our candidates are that come up for the organs that are available. So the first, in sequence A, for those KDPIs less than 20%, that's the Lamborghini list there on the left. The KDPI over on the right, those are the old Hondas that will probably start. They'll probably work, but they're not going to run forever. And then in the middle, that 20 to 35 and 35 to 85. So for the KDPI, those donors that have those really solid, good kidneys are first going to go to the highly sensitized. So that is a big change. So patients that are, I believe it starts at 98, 99, 100% sensitized, it'll go to a national allocation. So that will really increase the chance that those patients, to think they previously really had only access to really good matches in the region. Now they'll have potential matches all over the country. So they anticipate that this will really help out those highly sensitized patients. The zero ABDR mismatches, so those perfect matches that are in the top 20% of EPTS. So if you have a perfect kidney that comes up and it happens to be a perfect match to you, if you're not in that top 20% of EPTS, if you don't have a terribly long survival, you actually won't even have access to that kidney. So prior living donors end up coming up after for those KDPIs of less than 20%. And then we've got local peds, local top 20%. And then it goes down to national. So you can see how the rest of those work. When we get to sequence D, we've got the highly sensitized and the perfect matches that come up first, and then it just runs the usual list. And those, for sequence D, for those KDPI greater than 85%, they have to consent to those. So patients, much like getting the expanded criteria donor kidneys in the past, there's a specific consent, and we've already got that in production. It's already being used. So they have to expressly say, and we really should be encouraging all of those patients that have the perhaps are a little, how do I say that politely, are a little more in the advanced age category, to partake in the higher KDPI donors if we're not getting them a living donor. So PRA, so here you can see, again, the blue bar is the one that's important. Those recipients that have really high PRAs, especially 100% on the modeling, the percent of those patients getting transplanted is really going to increase, and then we'll see some moderate increases with those in the mid-range as well. All right. So impact on patients, I think it's truly it's impacting the centers more than it's going to impact the patients because so much of it happens behind the scenes. It's estimated, and from what, again, people that are much smarter than I am on SRTR and biostatisticians and UNOS, patients with a roughly 5 years of dialysis time or more will actually move up on the list. But what they haven't explained to us yet, there's going to be, and Dr. Baligi, you may know, there's been talk of patients kind of getting some of their time grandfathered in when the list goes live. For those patients that have been on the list for 5 years or 6 years, getting some credit for that time with the new system when it goes live. But I haven't heard exactly the details of how that's going to work. The accrual of points for sensitization previously being a living donor, as we've talked about, aren't going to change, and then the consent we've already talked about. So, Dr. Balliga, have you heard anything about how those will get grandfathered in and for how long?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Other thing, Alyssa, and maybe my impression was, for those GFRs of less than 20, that's not really going to change from the current system. So, in the sense that what we do now is, what we do now is if anybody's less than GFR 20, we can list them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to change, but I don't think it's going to be retrospective, at least to my understanding.
It is, if they're not on the list, but we have evidence of a GFR 20 or less from 5 years ago, they actually will get credit for that. The initial information that went out was it was only going to be dialysis time and with the dialysis start date, but they have made it clear that it will go back. We can get retrospective
pull
time.
up a creatinine of 4 or 5 years ago, they'll get that time.
Yep. Yep. So it's for, then it comes a question of how much, how many resources are we going to devote to that to really look up. But if a patient comes in and says, no, I've had end-stage renal disease for years, it will definitely be worth their time to go back and see if they can find any of their lab reports so we can get them some of that credit. Yeah, I think it was a little confusing when the system first came out because they didn't clarify that, but I've checked with UNOS specifically on that. All right, so the strategies to benefit patients. So it's interesting. So UNOS, the way that UNOS pays to run and to employ all of the people that work for UNOS is on our listing fees. Does anybody know how much it costs us as a center to add a patient to the UNOS list? It's about $1,000 right now, so you guys are very close. So it's about $1,000 to add a patient to the list. And so one of the things that UNOS is very worried, 35,000 patients get added to the list every year, 25,000. That's their operating budget right there. That pays for all the technical work running. They've got just a slew of IS people that keep the system up and running. That's how they pay for it. So if now it doesn't matter if they're on the list and they can get time, UNOS is very, very concerned that they are going to see their operating budget cut because people are not going to get added early to the list. So one of their strategies, or one of the things that they've come out with, is continue to list patients early. You never know when that perfect match is going to come along. So we will use their theory that it's still going to be worth putting patients on the list, especially if it's a quality of life issue for patients. If they're sick, even if they're not, if they have a GFR of 25 but are still not feeling well, it's still worth putting them on the list, especially if they dip down into the teens for their GFR. So the zero antigen mismatch rules will still apply. So if that patient gets a perfect match from somewhere, even though it's not going to be first on the allocation, they still can see some benefit. Educating patients on KDPI to really talk to them about taking those higher KDPI organs, because remember these are all the organs that were the 85%. All of the KDPI numbers are just the organs that were recovered last year. So it's not all of the potential organs that were evaluated. That is of organs that were recovered, and they're not going to recover kidneys if they don't think that they're going to work. So if you think of it in that light, a KDPI of 85 is still a good kidney for a lot of patients. And then encourage multiple listing. That we may have more options for that coming up as other centers may be sprouting up. In different regions, I will highlight there, they can see a benefit if they're listed at multiple regions, but we do want to make sure that they know that they have a duty to us and to the other center to keep their information updated, because it's a little bit of a waitlist nightmare, right, Trish, when someone's multi-listed at numerous other centers. So those are the main benefits to patients. I think having the other thing that's not listed there is really having an idea, having some solid numbers and some solid research behind the 8-year graft survival, 10-year graft survival, at least better than we have now. So that's it. Any questions? It's a little bit of a dry topic. Yes.
Do you anticipate calling people in for kidneys and them asking us the KDPI of the kidney?
I don't think so.
Because you'd be surprised what they do ask us some.
Yeah, I think I'm certain that there will be some savvy patients that have done their homework and that remember that, that the education and that sort of thing. I think in general, probably not too many. But there certainly are some savvy patients out there.
And then I guess would we be allowed to tell them that?
Certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right now, I think with the listings, like you ask the patients if they would be willing to accept an ECD. So is it going to be like, give me a number, KDPI, or is it going to say, will you accept a KDPI greater than 85?
So I don't know if it has changed yet.
It has in the UNO system. It's already changed.
So it gives you,
and our consent form has the KDPI greater than 85% on it right now.
But does it give you an option to give a number, like what their minimum accepted or maximum acceptable
Yes, in UNOS,
KDPI is?
Yes, so that's how we're listing them right now, with the minimal acceptance of 84% if they decline, or 85 or 100% if they don't.
Okay.
Maximum. Yeah.
But is it a free field?
It is a free
Put any
field
number.
that we do
Yeah.
put in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so patients can technically pick their number. I'd probably discourage that, other than the use of, for the ECDs or KPI greater than 85 or not, just because that limits the number of kids. I mean, really, what's the difference between a KDPI 40 and 50? But we may know a couple patients that think that they understand the system and that they're doing it's their choice. But I would probably discourage them picking their own number other than taking part in the 85 or greater.
Did UNOS send to everyone that's waitlisted to the transplant center specific? Do you notify them that the changes are coming December?
I know we haven't talked about it as a center, but I know that there's a patient brochure that'll be given out to, as of December 4th, to new patients that come in. I'm assuming we will be sending that to all of our listed patients for information. As they are coming in for re-see visits, I am reconsenting them for the KDPIs greater than 85 and trying to explain the system as we see the patient by patient.
Yes, so the patients that are already listed as accepting ECDs kind of naturally get their system, or in the unit system will automatically switch them over to accepting any KDPI, so is accepting those 85 or greater. But for new patients, and UNOS has some nice brochures and things and patient information that they put out. It is still fairly complex. I don't think there's a way to easily explain the system using all the acronyms and everything. But those that are already listed for ECDs, kind of that automatically switches over for us.
The patients that I've been called in for backup 3 and 4 times. I know I'm at the top of the list. I could totally change for them.
We're not
Yes,
giving
okay.
that information out.
I'm not sure if we talked about this when I stepped out, but do you anticipate there's going to be a lot more regional, national sharing with the system?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's definitely with the highly sensitized piece. I don't think it's going to, will we see more of our deceased donors or more of our kidneys exported? I don't know. I would hope not. But
How many kidneys are falling into that low KDPI range, that Lamborghini range? How many kidneys?
So it would be 20% of what has been recovered in the previous year, if the math is right. So I don't know how many that is nationally.
Or like in this region.
In this region, I'm not sure.
High quality kidneys. I'm just wondering, how that's going to impact the flow of the OR, and are you going to get a lot of ship-ins or ship-ins out kidneys and things like that?
Yeah, I don't know. We've got a pretty. I think if you looked on a continuum, our OPO is very good, but they don't even pump kidneys here, so they're not taking a lot of those kidneys that would be, or they don't recover kidneys, I don't think, from those donors that are really riskier, that would really fall high on that KDPI scale. So if we start pumping, I think you'll see them being a little more aggressive with that, though.
But on a low scale, you're going to run down all those regional, national,
Yep.
and then it goes to the next, or whatever.
Yeah, so we could. It'll be interesting to watch, but we still don't. Like I mentioned, we don't know what's going to happen with our lists, and really see if patients are going to move. How they're really going to fall out. If we're going to see a lot of shifting in our candidate list here. We've got a pretty healthy population down here, so. Be surprised. Candace?
I know with the highly sensitized patients that we're going to be required to share regionally. Usually, like when the OPO has to offer those, that center will request if they can have local backup or something like that. 'Cause they're not going to want to accept it if there's a chance of a positive cross-match. Is there any sort of ruling saying, like the OPO can say, no, you can't have local backup to maybe help to keep those
That
kidneys
remains the
locally?
same. That remains the same. The LPO
So the
makes the
OPO can
decision.
say no to local backup on a
Correct.
zero mismatch?
Correct.
Yeah,
They would
remember,
have to
those are
go
going
back to the-
nationally. So, if we're sending a kidney to Seattle, Washington from our local area, there, if it needs to be reallocated from there after 14 hours of it getting there, it's probably, that could definitely have impact on that kidney. So you may see some more OPOs a little more than likely, especially given the geographic distance, and saying okay to that, just so it gets used. Because OPOs have kind of an SRTR scorecard, just like we do, and they get dinged when organs get recovered and not used. So it's in everybody's best interest to try to use them. So, good question. Yes.
Just a curiosity with the operating costs for UNOS, and they're worried about losing money. Is it $1,000 every organ that we list, or does hearts cost more? They're going to raise our price, or?
No, it's the same. It's the same on each one. And they did add, they increased the cost this last year, partially because they're reworking their the system. I think it's a new platform. I don't speak computerese, but they're doing a lot of work on the on UNET in the system. So that was one of the reasons that they gave. But a lot of folks on the in the committee suspect that it was anticipating that there may be a decrease in listing volumes. But they're the same, and if someone's double listed, it's actually 2 fees. So.
And what about double organ, like if you're a kidney heart?
Or double organ, yeah.
Oh.
Yep, it's 2 listing fees.
And different centers too, 2 listings?
Mm-hmm.
Actually,
Okay.
I don't know if you address this or not, but do you feel that this is going to increase our amount of kidney transplants, or decrease, or kind of, because if we're going to be sending more out and maybe taking more in from outside, getting by even?
I honestly don't know. I think until we see really what happens to our list, I'd like to think that we're gonna transplant more, but we've got a lot of different initiatives going on. So, well, let's just say it's going to increase, and then we'll see what happens. Yeah.
With working on a national level, being that you're saying a lot of centers, their patients have been on the list 5 and 6 years, where our average is 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So are patients going to be dropping down on the list significantly?
So, because of the way the allocation changes, it could be. Our patients tend to come, at least anecdotally from what I've seen, our patients tend to come very quickly to transplant. So we have, the majority of patients that we review are either newly on dialysis or, have not been on dialysis for too terribly long. I just came this last year from Chicago, and our average was about 5 to 6 years On the outside, probably patients that were sensitized 8 to 10 years. And we routinely had patients that had been on dialysis for 15 years, 7 years, and were just coming to transplant either because of access issues or just not knowing about the option. UCSF has about a 10-year, San Francisco has about a 10-year wait. Their average is about 10 years because of their volume and the availability of their organs. So I would suspect that, sensitized, they have a bigger list, they have more people to transplant, they'll have more sensitized folks, that sort of thing. We've got a pretty good size list here though. 730 is a good size list. So
is it a little bit of a catch-22 because in terms of predicting outcome after the transplant, the longer you've been on dialysis, the worse that outcome is versus the wait time points that you get, so that they almost cancel each other out?
Yeah. Well, and that I think that's where the EPTS comes into play because it does take your dialysis time into effect. But yeah, I mean, we know if you look at the patients that are going to patients that do the best after transplant are patients that are preemptive. And without having that GFR less than 21 or being on dialysis, they don't consistently earn those years. So it's going to be difficult for them to climb the list. So that's going to be a group that we're really going to want to focus the option of living donation for.
The new allocation affects patients that are listed for like heart, kidney, liver, kidney.
That I don't know. Dr. Baliga, do you know how that? I think the extrarenal organ still drives it for those. So I don't think that impacts. There are some centers that are a little sneaky when it comes to that. They list everybody for a liver, kidney, and then they decide, when the organs get there that they're not going to use the kidney.
Well, they're going to use it, just not on that patient.
Yeah. You're full of good questions today.
I know. That chart that you had that had like divided between like the KDPIs. Yeah. So like you had like the top it was
The sequence chart.
The sequencing.
The sequence one, I believe.
It was
The A through D.
not like a graph, but like a
That.
So like, is that like the order that they're going to be offered? So is like highly sensitized going to be before the zero mismatches?
Mhm.
Oh, so there's going to be like a lot of people ahead of our local.
The point of doing that for the highly sensitized is so they get a look at every kidney that's out there, because it's so hard to find one that matches, and you don't want to send it somewhere else and have them miss their one opportunity for like a 3-year period that they might actually get a good kidney.
And they're still gonna like when they list the kidneys, they're still gonna check off their like non-acceptable images. So like some of them won't even show up. Okay.
Yes, so that's another kind of operational piece that we're going to really depend highly on the OPOs around the country to make sure that they keep up those lists of unacceptables, to make sure that we can make this efficient. Otherwise, we could go through, you could have 10 cross matches going in 10 different parts of the country that you're waiting to come up to see if the kidney can be allocated. So, good question.
I think it's going to be like 100% are going to be nationally offered right away, 99% regionally, and 98% plus.
Okay.
One of the things to me that's kind of an ethical issue with the multiple listing, because you would think that this new listing criteria would decrease the need to multi-list in different regions, and according to the NODA, it's in direct violation of what's outlined, which is that there will be no preferential donation by financial means. And the only people who can afford to list in separate regions are the ones who can afford to fly down at the drop of a hat, maybe even have to get retested at a second center and pay out of pocket if need be. So it's kind of an ethical issue there, whether that should even be allowed. Hopefully this will decrease the need to continue to do the multiple listing.
With the multiple listing, though, if they start a dialysis, the dialysis start date is the wait time at each center.
Right.
So they get that, and then the tiebreaker, say they're highly sensitized, the tiebreaker would be the center that they were listed with first gets that offer for that patient.
But the point about the financial means is
Right.
somebody who doesn't have money can't fly from New York to come down here to get a kidney at the drop of a hat.
But the thing is that if it's a highly sensitized patient, they're going to be offered at their local center
Right.
anyway.
Right.
So
So
it really
that's
would
it.
negate having them
That's what I'm
come
saying.
down.
This
Yeah.
will probably make that multiple listing less of a need.
There's still going to be those
Yeah.
patients
Oh, yeah.
that they think they're increasing their chances
Yeah.
by being listed at every program within a 5-state area.
It's also not supposed to matter where they live, and listen to what she's saying about San Francisco
Right.
compared to Tampa.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's probably
Some
a
of
bigger
those-
disparity, but at least that's.
And not only just being able to fly down here, but being able to afford to stay here for the care.
So
So.
our second transplant house is getting ready to open. Put them all up. All right, yes.
Do I assume, excuse me, that the highly sensitized allocation is local, regional, national?
No, it'll be national. So for those that are 100% sensitized, it will be national. It comes up national first.
Then how does that happen? What if there's a local potential recipient that has an acceptable cross-match and a national one that has an acceptable cross-match?
So I suspect it'll go by that dialysis start time for those, for who's got because you can have up to 202 years. So I think if they were all other things equal, I think they would look at, is that your understanding, Trish? We wait time, and then if there's one in, if
Right.
everything is exactly the
If
same.
someone has a day more of dialysis than the other one, the day more of dialysis, even if they're across the country, we'll get that offer first.
Fractional points according to number of days.
It just seems to me that potentially 50 different people, it could be being cross-matched at the same time for the same organ.
Well, they'd have to get blood to those.
I thought this was the first step towards national share.
We're hoping everyone keeps up the unacceptables as just a preliminary, but yes.
And highly sensitized is greater than 80%.
It's considered 98, 99, or 100
Yeah.
for the kind of,
That's where you get like
The
hundreds
allocation.
of points.
yeah.
In between there, you get a few points for
So
each
roughly at 80
percentage.
you get 4 points. At 98 you get like 10 points. At 99 you get 17 points, and 100 you get 202 points.
But when this says highly sensitized,
98, 99, 100.
I mean, in some, I know in Chicago, we had out of the 650, we had a list of about size about 630, 650. We had 50 to 75 patients that were, 95 and above.
It really, yeah, they're CPRA, and then we probably have a good percentage of that the ones that have been on the list for 10+ years that I've been around, and I still know their names. There's about 10 or 15 of those.
Yeah, we just did one. How long was the lady, the suitcase lady?
Suitcase.
Suitcase lady.
She's maintaining patient confidentiality.
Well, she got mad and put her suitcase in the attic, and then when years later, she finally got it down and brought it this time, and then she got them.
She said she, I don't remember.
It was like
She
10
said she'd been on the
years.
list for 10 years and
She
got
started
tired
as
of
a
what she had her
pediatric.
bag packed, ready to go, and then 10 years later, nobody had ever called her, so she unpacked the bag, put the suitcase away, and this was the first time she pulled the suitcase out of the attic to come in.
So maybe we just start transfusing all of our patients and make them sensitized.
Well, the trouble sometimes though with those where they don't have the complete HLA done on the donor.
I did one time.
Like the extra part, like the ones that they don't put on the actual
Where
donor
it's,
stuff?
where we go into UNET and we're talking to the immunology lab
And
and
they like have to
need-
call them?
They need more
Yeah.
complete.
Right, yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, so I'm sure there are going to be unintended consequences, so no one can take vacation as part of the donor center activity team December 4th. And there's definitely going to be some issues, so we'll see how it goes.
So should we just like track stuff like that?
Yes, just let us know. We've got I'll be sitting with the UNOS folks on December 4th and 5th, so just let us know what's going on. I'll make sure I sit right next to Cliff, our regional administrator at the UNOS meeting. All right. So we don't know everything, but this is, we'll see how it goes. Thank you, everybody.
This is a,